it kind of refuses to give those answers to that mystery.
Because there's so many episodes, my God, they get to go into so many places.
You could feel the energy and the passion for television as a medium coming through in these episodes.
Hello and welcome all to ScreenRant's Challenge My Goat. My name is Todd Gilchrist and I am your Sherpa through this show of superlatives. Today's topic is the greatest TV show of all time. Our expert today is ScreenRant Deputy News Editor Graeme Guttman. What makes you qualified to choose the greatest TV show of all time, and what is your GOAT?
What makes me qualified? Well, I've been watching TV as long as I can remember. Me and my mom would sit down every night when there was a new episode of Lost or Desperate Housewives when I was 9 years old, which, no business being 9 years old watching that, but nonetheless. And ever since then, I've been obsessed with TV. I watch all different kinds of TV. I love Real Housewives as much as I love The Sopranos, for example. A wide range of tastes, I would say. And as for my pick, I believe that The Leftovers is the greatest television show of all time.
And now our challenger, it's entertainment journalist Eric Goldman. Eric, what makes you qualified to challenge Graeme's GOAT?
Well, besides just being an obsessive TV watcher my whole life as well, someone who would... not look at everything I could to find out what was happening, what was coming up, watch every show. But then in my career-wise, I've been covering entertainment for quite a while. I was the executive editor of the TV section at IGN for quite a while, then the managing editor at Fandom, and have sort of dug in with a lot of TV shows, both as a fan and also as a journalist, and as a cat lover, as my cat's invading the screen, to basically, I've seen a lot. And a lot of shows, and there's a lot of shows that I've kind of dived into and watched multiple times. But yeah, I do think I have a pretty good background of television, through the decades at this point.
Sure. Well, guys, you will each have 2 minutes to lay your respective foundations. Graeme, what makes The Leftovers the greatest TV show of all time?
Well, I'll start with two words, Carrie Coon. Carrie Coon gives a phenomenal performance in The Leftovers. But ultimately, I think that The Leftovers came at a really interesting time for television, prestige TV, peak TV, whatever you want to call it. It was kind of in the middle of happening. Streaming was beginning its rise, and it was kind of presented as this mystery box television show. But I think what makes The Leftovers so special and so great is that it kind of refuses to give those answers to that mystery that you would normally expect, while giving you kind of these unexpected emotional revelations, story revelations that tie everything together in such a way that is so profound and I think so moving.
Sure. Eric, why do you disagree?
Look, The Leftovers is a great show, but I think it's great in a couple of sort of specific ways. And we'll get to my pick, but I kind of look for something that can maybe encompass even more. So, The Leftovers certainly got being very sad covered very well. That was well established. And, it had some really interesting diversions and some things that it did. But I also think it was ultimately, still limited in that it was kind of operating within a certain framework, within a certain type of zone. And even though it could get weird, I think we sort of still felt the limits of where The Leftovers was going to go, versus I think a couple other shows, one in specific I'm going to talk about, where you can do even more and kind of take TV and really constantly within the framework of one show, keep reinventing without destroying your show in the process. So, respect to The Leftovers, but I also think that I don't think that it was breaking so many boundaries constantly. It was doing what it did well, but I kind of look for even more.
Sure. Well, you've teed it up really well. What is your challenger pick?
My challenger pick is Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which debuted in 1997, and I think fundamentally changed television and pop culture permanently to this day. Has had so much of an impact as far as everything it did, how it, showed that you could subvert things, how you could not stick to one tone, to one genre, how it could really kind of deliver everything within this one series under this one goofy title. and how it could really make you feel every emotion. And you never knew what you were going to get week to week. And you never even knew what you're going to get scene to scene, because it could shift so quickly from something super funny to something very sad and then something really exciting.
Sure. Well, you guys have set the stage beautifully. Leftovers versus Buffy. I'll start with you, Graeme. Can you, based on what Eric just said, how would you sort of respond to his, if not criticisms, but sort of his characterization of the show in comparison to Buffy?
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that The Leftovers does everything that Eric says that Buffy does. I think it plays with genre, it plays with tone. There were criticisms leveled against it, especially its first season. It was described as difficult, challenging, overtly sad, very dark. But I think there's an underlying tone of optimism there that if you can tune into, that really kind of carries you through. And, speaking to, obviously Buffy ran for so much longer, so many more episodes, it was more serialized in that way. So it had that ability to change genres and things like that. But you could argue The Leftovers does that as well. You have episodes like International Assassin, where Justin Theroux literally goes into a dream universe, becomes an international assassin, and, has to murder people. So I think each episode can kind of churn in that way as well. And while it's much more limited, there's only 28 episodes. It only ran for about 3 years. I think it still encompasses everything that we kind of look for in a television show, from, humor, heart, to action storytelling, and kind of building this expansive world that, while it may not have had as much time to flesh it out, every detail is so carefully considered and so well thought out that it just feels so lived in a way.
Eric, what would you say to that in terms of how carefully conceived Buffy might be in comparison?
Yeah, the other thing is, it's not a small thing that The Leftovers ran for 28 episodes versus Buffy, it was 140 something, a little shy of 150. Because I do think that's a fundamental thing that, you could say, well, Leftovers just didn't have the chance Buffy did, but looking at it in totality, that's what I would think is that, yeah, Leftovers has a handful of episodes that do some really fun things, but it's a handful of episodes. And then it has to sort of get back to its core, what it's doing and the story it's telling, which is kind of this, it's not as heavily serialized in some respects as Buffy, but at the same time it is, because everything's under the umbrella of these people reacting to this big thing that happened, this vanishing of the people. Whereas I think Buffy does benefit because it has, each season gets to somewhat reset because it's a serialized story and they get to have a new villain. They have to get a new focus. But then because there's so many episodes, my God, they get to go into so many places. So they get to do the big musical episode and make it, I think a lot of TV shows have done a musical episode, what I think is the best musical episode of all time. And then they get to do an alternate reality episode that isn't just a fun alternate reality episode, but does something crazy where our point of view character, in this case, it was Cordelia, spoilers for some Buffy, gets killed halfway through, and you kind of subvert on top of a subversion. And I think that's what Buffy really got to do as it went on, was always zig when you think it's going to zag. And so there's so many examples of that where they do the silent episode and they say, okay, our show is known for quips and jokes and having, funny dialogue. We're going to take that away and we're going to show you an amazing episode of TV without the thing that some people would say is either our crutch or our, to our benefit. So I just think that Buffy was just constantly, Leftovers did it a few times, but Buffy did it over and over and over again in so many different ways.
Graeme, he's making a pretty strong case. I see you nodding, though. Maybe you have some thoughts to add.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the most interesting things about The Leftovers, and it shares this with Buffy as well, but, it's based on a novel by Tom Perrotta. The first season completely covers all of the events of that novel, and it does reinvent itself each season. It changes locations. Season 2 is Texas. Season 3, they go to Australia. And as far as I think the benefit of having a shorter run and only being 28 episodes is I think you get a complete story in a way that I just don't feel with Buffy. I think we stick with, these core characters. There's a core emotional journey there that comes forward, throughout those 28 episodes. And, while we kind of stick, as Eric said, under this sort of umbrella of the sudden departure, which is what they call the inciting event in The Leftovers, I think what's so great about it is that it uses that to explore so many different avenues of, the human condition. You have, a mother who's grieving because she's lost 2 sons and a husband to the sudden departure. You have a man who's grieving because his wife has joined a cult in the wake of, these people disappearing from the face of the earth. So, when you say that Buffy reinvents itself, it's funny because I think that The Leftovers maybe had one of the most successful reinventions, if not the most successful reinvention in TV of all time, because it was able to go beyond the source material. And we all know what that looks like. We all saw the final season of Game of Thrones when TV showrunners don't have a source material to go off of anymore, and they may or may not flounder. Your opinion may vary there. So that, Damon Lindelof was able to go beyond the source material, tell a complete story with these characters, and honestly, in my opinion, enrich the novel and do better than the novel, I think is a testament to the show's power and the way it kind of establishes itself as one story.
Gotcha. Well, a question for each of you, and also for your cat, Eric.
My mom's cat, to be clear.
Curious, sure. I'm curious how you feel like the idea of sort of prestige TV, which to me The Leftovers very much is, where Buffy is not, either burnishes its greatness or limits it. Because I feel like whether you're talking about your show or his, talk about, sort of that sort of imprint that has been laid over so much, especially HBO driven television, that I wonder how that affects your perception of that show, how much you think that the cultural perception of that show might have resulted.
It does seem like the longer we go on, look, a lot of shows that we would call prestige TV are, of course, great shows that told great stories, but we have come to a place, and I think you're seeing this now with this pivot with The Pitt, for instance, where everyone was so happy that The Pitt is 15 episodes versus 10 or 8 or 6, is that prestige TV kind of came with some prices. And one of them was getting less and less episodes and seasons, to the point that it stopped feeling quite like TV. And I'm not saying like The Leftovers isn't a TV show. It is. And yet I think there's a ... there, because it's, these 3 short seasons versus, an ongoing series that goes for multiple years that does 22 episodes a season, a crazy thing, but, something that was done regularly and had to put up with that burden. And that meant, of course, all 22 weren't going to be great. But, if you had a skilled writing team and a skilled cast, you could deliver a hell of a lot great stuff every year. So I think prestige TV is that strange thing of some of it doesn't quite feel like TV. HBO went all in on it's not TV, it's HBO. In fact, I should say, Your Honor, they said themselves they're not TV. But I do think that kind of put this strange thing where it did start put things into a bucket where it's like, well, it feels like TV adjacent almost. And I think we see that to this day, because there are these other shows where it's like, okay, I really like what they're doing, but it's also not quite a TV show. And now we're starting to feel people wanting the return of something like that. A weekly show that delivers a pretty good amount of episodes, even if it might not be 22 a week, quality, but can keep us engaged in these characters and their stories and, an ongoing narrative.
Sure. Graeme, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no denying that The Leftovers would technically fall under the category of prestige TV. But I mean, these days it feels like the term prestige TV can be and has been used almost derogatorily against some shows like that. Not that I think Eric is using it in that way, but I think that as far as The Leftovers goes, I think it's this happy medium between the two. Like, obviously, 10 episodes a season. I think there's 1 or 2 seasons that fall below the 10 episodes for The Leftovers. But I don't think it ever shies away from the fact that it is a television show. There are episodes where we, it's not quite a bottle episode, but we spend time, with specific characters. I highlight season 1, episode 6, Nora Durst / Carrie Coon's, big showcase in that first season. And similarly, we follow, Kevin Garvey's father in that show in one episode in the 3rd season. And we follow Matt, the priest, in a couple episodes. So while, The Leftovers would fall under this category of prestige TV, I don't think it was ever afraid to be TV in that way. And it bucked against that declaration whenever it could, I think. It is ultimately a drama, a dark drama. It's very sad, but I don't think it shies away from its genre trappings either. There's sci-fi elements there inherently baked into the premise. Like I mentioned with the International Assassin episode, you have this alternate universe, and Justin Theroux's in an elevator fighting guys, so I think it was delighted to do that. I think you could feel the energy and the passion for television as a medium coming through in these episodes, despite the fact that maybe they were limited in the episode count or budgetary reasons, what may have you.
One other follow-up, though, because I did think about how you were saying how people don't consider Buffy prestige TV, and it is interesting because you're right, but why is that? And I think if you think about the history of prestige TV, there's almost no show that aired on a network and no show that did more than 13 episodes a season that has ever been called prestige TV. So I think that there was a certain snobbery involved in that, because I think the thing about Buffy is, besides the fact that it will consistently be on people's lists of the best shows of all time, not that that matters, only matters with us here thing. But, also is the fact that it's been so influential and so many TV creators of shows that are considered prestige TV. And I know Damon Lindelof has talked about how important Buffy was and how it really was a game changer as far as, seeing that you could do these subversions and that you could surprise the audience in ways that people just didn't see coming in TV, because people did think it would be kind of cookie cutter. And so I think that should really kind of be kept in mind as far as the influence and how so much of what we consider prestige TV, Leftovers included, owes Buffy a debt of gratitude for really kind of laying the groundwork for a lot of what has followed again to this day, I think.
Sure. Well, Graeme, I'm going to give you 60 seconds to tell us why your show is the GOAT, and then we're going to close our debate here.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think from top to bottom, The Leftovers is to use a common phrase, firing on all cylinders. You have everything from Max Richter's score. You've got some of the greatest television directors working on there: Mimi Leder, Michelle MacLaren, Craig Zobel. Performances across the board. I obviously highlighted Carrie Coon, but you have Ann Dowd, you have Justin Theroux, you get to see Margaret Qualley and Jasmine Savoy Brown in their breakout roles. I don't think that there's a bad episode in The Leftovers. Each one is such an integral piece to the story that Lindelof and Perrotta are telling in that show, which all builds to this emotional finale that, I watched it earlier and I've seen it maybe 10 times and I cried again. So I think it speaks to so much of what we're afraid to talk about, or we're afraid to ask ourselves, or we're afraid to look inward and think about, in such a way that is life affirming. And I think, TV doesn't get better than that.
Sure. Eric, give us 60 seconds on why Buffy is the greatest of all time.
I'm tempted to list 50 episodes, but I'll just mention 2 episodes here that I think really encompass Buffy. One I did mention already, which is Hush, which is the silent episode. But I think what really stands out about Hush is Buffy had a lot of great Monster of the Week episodes. Haven't even really talked about that, because those are such good ends. You can get someone into a show because you go, hey, look, they have a cool episode about this kind of creature. And Hush is amazing because it's got the gentlemen just to be these freaky nightmare monsters that I know a lot of people, that was their gateway drug to Buffy. So the fact that show could continually offer that, I think, is something special. And then I think about the episode The Body, and how it's one of the most emotional, impactful episodes ever dealing with death, and how it made sure that this was a death that didn't have anything supernatural. So there were other sad deaths on the show, but you could say a vampire did it. But it'd be like, no, what if it just happened like people? And I think that's the power of Buffy, is to surprise you, even when the surprise is someone just dies of natural causes or of just like a medical thing that could happen to anyone. It was constantly saying, okay, if now part of the show is that we're going to surprise you with supernatural things happening left and right, let's surprise you with something mundane, but that, is so real as well. And I think that's the power of that show, is constantly interweaving all those elements.
Sure. Well, listen, after listening to you two debate, I've decided that you're both wrong, because as long as Twin Peaks exists, there can be no greater show on television in the history of the medium. But no, you guys both made really beautiful arguments. If you guys disagree with our GOAT selection, or you disagree with Eric, please head over to ScreenRant.com to our Challenge My GOAT article series and let us know your pick in the comments. If you make a compelling argument, we will read it on the show next week. Speaking of which, last week we debated the GOAT Batman. Predictably, things got spirited in the comments section. I wanted to highlight a few of our favorite reactions. A commenter named Popcorn Prophet said, "This is the most controversial take I've seen in this series so far. I'll take things a step further and say that the best live action Batman of all time is Robert Pattinson. He finally captured the version that fans have been craving for years, a grounded, emotionally complex, detective-driven Dark Knight. His portrayal leans into Batman's humanity, showing a young Bruce Wayne still figuring out who he is, making mistakes, and learning what vengeance really means." Conversely, Patrick said, "You legitimately wouldn't be on this site writing about Batman without the 1989 version. It was the genesis of what we know as Batman today, and for all modern superhero films, honestly. It was, at the time, a cultural phenomenon. Keaton was perfect, other than being a bit short." I'm really grateful for you guys both for joining us today. You know, people feel very strongly about Batman. I suspect they're going to feel very strongly about this topic. Speaking of which, next week we will be tackling Best Superhero TV Show. Make sure you read and tune in for another exciting debate. Guys, thank you so much for your time today. Where can people find you, Graeme?
So you can find my work on ScreenRant. I often write reviews for both film and television, and you can find me on X/Twitter. I still call it Twitter, at Graeme CGU.
Eric, how about you?
First of all, Todd, I'm going to have to check out this Twin Peaks show you're mentioning, because sounds pretty interesting. You can find me
it's a laugh riot. It's great.
Riot. I've got a podcast I co-host with Matt Fowler, who might challenge for Leftovers fan number one. But we have the We Enjoy podcast you can find anywhere you listen to your podcast. I'm on most of your social media platforms under the Eric Goldman, THE at the top. You'll find me on Twitter and on Instagram and on YouTube under that name. So look for me there, and you can find my writing at various websites such as IGN and Nerdist, etc., etc.
Gotcha. Well, listen, thank you both for joining us today, and thank you, readers or listeners, and we'll see you next week.